Alright, let's add a little life into the game by designing the character sprite. Grab a palette from Itch, open a 32x32 project in Aseprite, and just start drawing with your eyes closed. Hopefully your sporadic patchy pixel placement will have it turn into something not terrifying. It's beautiful. Great job. Okay, I was being insincere before, but this is actually something. I tried out a few different accessories and hairstyles and some clones of the main character. Ooh, that one's got a scar. Also, hiring these 4 headless body doubles for the animation frames really helped, since they naturally had subtly different body shapes. I took a Polaroid of each of them and sticky taped the same default head onto all 4 photos. When you flip through them with your thumb, you've got a slightly odd looking idle animation. After a few more iterations, I prestiged all the other clones and chose this one. The asymmetry of the hat and watch, I think, will help sell the direction the character is facing. Oh, stop that. Especially when side on like this. But since I now had more detail than originally planned, I decided to make a colour palette myself. I don't really know colour theory or which colours go with which without some form of trial and error, so I used online tools like on Canva's website, or colours. Coolers?
Couleur.
Cheers, Google. I settled on this and got into making a few other sprites. I first designed them in a colour that I won't be using on that sprite, and then changed the colours to see what they'll look like with different materials. I made a few more sprites like a clock, a table, 2 types of shelves and some coffee tables. I found some reference images for inspiration, but none were quite the style I was going for and I had to make a lot of it up. So I'm quite happy with how they turned out. You can also see hiding up the top here that since I had a new palette, I left multiple versions of the character to test what they'd look like against the other sprites in the scene. And just in case the puzzles made the character hungry and they needed something to eat off, I made some plates that could be put into the shelves, which is a win-win since it also helps to add variety between sprites. That seemed like a good enough start, so I imported the sprite sheet into the Unity project and realised something that made me completely change the art style. Here's the problem. This character's a 32x32 pixel sprite. This is fine for grid-based movement, since we can just make them shift by 32 pixels each move. But when I first added the hat, I didn't realise I'd accidentally made the character 33 pixels high. Mostly because I didn't want to get rid of that button thing on top of the baseball cap, because it was the only thing that actually made it look like a baseball cap. You know, that thing. Oh yeah, of course. A squatchy. Anyway, that would mean I'd have to increase the sprite height to 40 pixels to make it at least divisible by 8. Because as we all know, if we can't make a number divisible by 16, we at least make it divisible by 8. That's what I was taught at number school anyway. Except now I hate all this empty space at the top of the sprite. In the end, I just went out and bought them a new hat which sits slightly further back on their head so you don't see the squatchy. We can leave the sprite at the neat ordered size of 32x32. Because as we all know, we only make a number divisible by 16 if it can't also be divisible by 32. I don't make the rules. The main problem happens when we try to involve the furniture sprites I made before. This chest of drawers, for example, or I guess it's like a dresser because it's got doors as well, or maybe it's a cabinet, or cabinets just have doors, right? Oh yeah, of course. A gentleman's chest. Anyway, it's a 48x48 pixel sprite. So now how should the gentleman's chest owner move? If they move on a 32x32 pixel grid like this, where in the cell should the chest sit in relation to the character? Here? Or here? If we put it here, the character can obviously walk in front of it, but visually walking behind it seems plausible too. It makes a little more visual sense to put it here and imagine it standing in line with the character, and its height makes it hang into the next cell above it, but it's clearer where the character can and can't go. A problem with this design though, is that since the chest hangs out to the top and left and I'm using Unity's tile map system, nothing can be placed on the same layer in the cells above or to the left. Moving the chest in the cell doesn't help at all either. And since the only next place to place the next chest is here, there's an awkward gap left behind. Okay, so why don't we make the movement grid 48 by 48 pixels? The character makes strangely long movements, but it does solve the furniture's proportion problem from before. But now we have a new problem. Some of the furniture sprites weren't 48 by 48. This bookshelf, for example, hangs into the cell above it by 16 pixels. Try to imagine this pink fedora is a button. It sits on the floor and opens a door or something when stepped on. If the character's feet are at the bottom of the cell, it would make sense for the button to be there too. So what if the level needs a button in this cell? Can it just not be seen by the player? Should I never place a button in the cell above furniture? Should I move it up so it's visible but the character just smushes their face into it? I decided that none of these quite worked for what I wanted, so I scrapped the whole art style and basically started again. I realised that I would have to keep everything to either a strict 32 by 32 pixel sprite, which would mean redoing all the furniture sprites anyway, or a 16 by 16 sprite, which would mean less detail, but also a lot less work on the art in the future so I could focus on the game logic and coding. I decided 16 by 16 pixel sprites for everything was the way to go. First I tried to make an oddly shaped lower resolution version of the original with the same colours, but it just looked messy. Then I tried flattening the colours to imply different parts while keeping the shape of the scaled down sprite. I also wanted to see if a simple silhouette sprite looked any better with the lower resolution. I kinda liked the look after reshaping it a little to bring their arms down and give them a neck. I thought the hair now kinda looked like an antenna or that light thing that anglerfish use to lure their prey. You know, that thing. An Esker. So I decided to scrap the idea of the main character being human and started to whip up this little Esker terrestrial. I knew I'd probably end up changing the sprite at some point anyway, so I was determined not to get stuck in the details that didn't help me find out if the game loop would even be enjoyable to begin with. I then gave my mini monochrome margin a little paint job to match the updated palette and ended up with this. Next it was time to take the side-on version of this smug Hotshot Thug's mugshot. I wanted everything to fit into the 16 by 16 grid cells, but the length and width of the interactable entity sprites can also just be any multiple of 16. Their heights can technically be higher than 16, like with this bookshelf, but because of the problem with the button from before, I'll just always place them somewhere so that the character can't go behind them, like against a wall. I played around with the shading for way too long, making multiple slightly dissimilar styles of the same sprite. I tried to pull everything into the same proportions and style so that they look somewhat cohesive together. Watch me struggle to figure out what I'm doing with the lower half of this gentleman's chest. Luckily I caught myself getting lost in the unimportant stuff and decided to leave it there for this iteration, since all I really needed was one 16 by 16 pixel sprite to make any basic test level. This was the tile sheet before choosing the final style. Again I had multiple versions of the character to test what they'd look like against the other sprites in the scene. With the character animation sprites and a few other entity sprites done, I was ready, again, to import them into the Unity project and get back to some more game logic, but with a little more than the red and white squares from before. Alright, that's all for this update. In the next one I'll be actually implementing the rough animations in the Unity project and adding a few features like undo and restart, and also just trying to figure out the direction of the game. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video and the development process so far. See ya folks, have a good one.